Verehrte Gäste, welcome back. 2 Wochen, 190 Länder, 1,5 Grad. Bei der Weltklimakonferenz in Glasgow 2020 haben sich die teilnehmenden Länder verpflichtet, maximal 1,5 Grad darf die Erderwärmung betragen, damit das Klimaabkommen Paris noch erreicht werden kann. Aber um diese Ziele tatsächlich umzusetzen, zu erreichen, müssen alle ran und es muss vor allen Dingen viel schneller alles gehen. Raus aus der ungebremsten Kohleverstromung, raus aus ineffizienten Subventionen für fossile Brennstoffe. Und für die Kontrolle und Umsetzung dieser ambitionierten Ziele ist Patricia Espinosa vor allem zuständig, verantwortlich. Sie ist die ehemalige Botschafterin Mexikos in Deutschland. Und jetzt ist sie Generalsekretärin der Klimarahmenkonvention der Vereinten Nationen. Und wo hat sie ihren Sitz? Raten Sie mal, in Bonn. Seit 2016 ist sie Chefin des größten Klimasekretariats der Vereinten Nationen. Das ist in den vergangenen 25 Jahren und vor allen Dingen jetzt unter ihrer Ägide zum Zentrum der internationalen Zusammenarbeit geworden. Um die hochambitionierten Klimaziele zu erreichen, müssen wir alle ran. Und genau da fängt Patricia Espinosas Arbeit richtig an. Sie spricht täglich mit den unterschiedlichsten Playern und Entscheidern weltweit, um für ihre Langzeitstrategien zu werben. Jüngst davon überzeugen konnte sie den Kongo, Mosambik oder Korea. Doch wie schafft sie es, die Länder von diesen ambitionierten Zielen zu überzeugen? Und welche Schritte wird sie als nächstes gehen? Das wird sie jetzt verraten im Gespräch mit Petra Pinzler, Hauptstadtkorrespondentin der ZEIT. Viel Freude dabei.
I warmly welcome you to our next session. I will now switch into English because this is a really international topic that we are talking about, climate crisis, the way how to fight climate crisis. And I'm very happy that we can now talk to Patricia Espinosa, General Secretary of the UNFCCC. 3 C's is always difficult to remember. But she will tell us what this all is about and what the state of the fight against the climate crisis is currently. So, Madam Secretary, if I may address you this way, when I was thinking about how to explain what's your real job, there was an image coming up into my mind, and I had the impression that, with all due respect, one could compare you to a nanny. Is this correct? Are you something like a global nanny trying to push the governments into action very swiftly and friendly?
Well, you know, in a way, what we have in the UNFCCC Secretariat is really to be the guardian of those legal instruments. On the one side, the Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, and before also the Kyoto Protocol. So in that regard, our main responsibility is, yes, to remind countries of their obligations, the obligations that they have really with all freedom undertaken under those instruments. So it is, yes, our job to be all the time stressing the need, stressing the importance of making progress. And I would say, you know, now that we know, it is really an issue as important as the biggest challenge that humanity is facing right now. It is a very big responsibility. However, we don't do it alone. We also do it, of course, with the governments, but also with the efforts of civil society and all the other sectors of the economy and societies globally. So, I had never thought about this image of a nanny, but I always say our role is to be the guardian of those instruments.
The guardian is a bit more polite, huh? In a way, it's about the same thing. Our listeners have the possibility to co-moderate. So if you want to send in questions, you can go to www.slido.de and you can send in questions. The first one is already coming in. But before I ask this one, I would like to have another practical question, Madam Secretary. How does this work? How do you work? Are you on the phone during the whole day? Do you talk to Bundeskanzler Scholz, to other heads of state? How does it work in practice, what you're doing?
Well, it has many different layers of work. One layer of work is, of course, within the Secretariat. For example, now that we have come out of Glasgow, to make an assessment of exactly what was decided, what is going to be our strategy in giving the parties everything they need in order to continue to make progress, to address their needs, and at the same time, for example, now going towards Egypt, what should be the expected outcomes in Egypt. That's an internal work, and as you can imagine, with the complexity of the agreement, the Paris Agreement, the fact that climate change implies really transformations in all areas of the economy and of society, that is very important to have that clarity. Then we also need to work very closely together with the incoming presidencies. In this case, it's Egypt. The foreign minister, Minister Shukri, has been designated as the COP27 president, so we are already in contact with him. He will be coming very soon to Bonn and to discuss exactly what their vision is for their conference and what our assessment is.
Maybe I can just briefly translate this to our listeners, because when you're in public diplomacy, as you are, all these abbreviations are just your daily bread and butter. The COP26 was the climate conference that was taking place in Glasgow last year, and now we're heading to the next one, which will take place in November in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So could you briefly tell us, where are we standing now? COP26, what was it very briefly about, and what are you looking forward when we go into the next climate conference?
Well, let me say, we are, I would say that Glasgow was a conference that was very productive. We have to admit that the conference results were not perfect, and we have seen that, and we have heard many voices pointing to that. It was not perfect, that's correct. Why was it not perfect? Because it does not bring us as close as we need to be now in order to reach the 1.5 degree goal at the end of the century. At the same time, we came out of Glasgow with with a lot of clarity on where we need to work and what we need to do in the areas of adaptation, mitigation, which is reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and finance. And that is very important because now we need to be very clear about those goals. The other area that was very successful was all the rules for the implementation of the Paris Agreement were completed, including those regarding carbon markets, which have been very controversial. So we have now rules to implement fully the Paris Agreement. We have also clarity on where we need to work further. That's why I believe that the conference was very productive. And we need to accelerate the action now in order to bring us to the 1.5 degree goal.
One of the biggest criticism of these climate conferences is that they are a lot about promises and not about delivering and action. I actually found this quote which says, "The road to hell is paved with good ambitions." So we have a lot of ambition, but what about reality?
Well, of course, I think that at the center of this agenda, there must be, in the minds of the leaders, in the minds of those who have a decision-making role, the fact that we're talking here about the future of humanity. And I think that is a very, very important issue that we should not lose sight of. On the other hand, yes, within our process, we have some instruments that allow us to give a follow-up to what the countries are doing. For example, this year, countries need to inform the Secretariat on what they have done, further from the goals and the plans that they presented last year in Glasgow. So we have this role also of looking at how are you performing? And we fully agree with you. We are also waiting for the specific plans, the specific deliveries of so many pledges that were presented, not only by parties, but also by non-party stakeholders during the conference, like businesses and investors.
Let's get a bit practical, because this is one of the questions one of our listeners is asking. Let's take the example Germany. We have a climate law, but at the same time, it's pretty sure that this year we will not reach the climate goals that are formulated within the climate law. And this has probably happened in lots of other countries as well. How much power do you have? How much leverage do you have to really push countries? Is it basically about talking them into something, or do you have any hands-on possibilities of pushing them a bit harder?
Well, I think in general, what we are seeing, and I as a United Nations official, I should not be commenting on any specific country. But in general, what we are seeing is currently, because of the pandemic also, and because of this climate crisis, a lot of the pledges are possibly not going to be reached. In other countries, they are going to be even reached much earlier than they were expected. What is very important, Petra, is that we keep in mind that we need to reach by 2030 the minus 45% reduction in emissions. And we need to acknowledge that these processes are not something that can happen from one day to the next. And at the same time, this means that everybody needs to assume and to really acknowledge that we all need to do much more. And this means, this includes, of course, the European Union, includes the big developing countries, the big emerging economies like China and India. It includes also the United States, Canada, Australia. Everybody must do more.
I think what you just mentioned is this so-called path dependency, and that we have to start today to reach then certain goals in 2030 or 2040, 2050, because you can't just shut off business from one day to the other. You were mentioning a couple of countries that are way ahead of their climate ambitions, of their climate goals. Could you name us some? Who are the good examples in this world?
Well, what we have seen, and I would not want to name specific countries, but let me tell you what the cases, more or less what the situation is. In some countries, especially developing countries, what they want to do when they present their plans, their NDCs, as we call the climate plans within the process, they try to make sure that this is something that they can achieve, so that they are not seen as not compliant with what they have promised, right? So what we have seen is, in many of those cases, if there is some movement towards, for example, more investment in certain sectors or a good evolution of the technologies. One case is solar technologies that have become much more accessible also in developing countries. So the plans that were presented at the COP in Paris did not foresee this kind of development, for example, in the solar energy sector. So these are the cases where you see some overachievements. But unfortunately, in many cases, it's in countries that do not have a significant impact in the overall global emissions.
Your office, when we prepared this interview, told me a couple of times that you're a diplomat, so you have to be diplomatic when you go public. But behind the scene, when you're in closed rooms, aren't you sometimes really angry that progress is so slow?
Yeah, well, definitely. I share the frustration of so many, definitely, you know, but at the same time, I think that what is guiding my efforts is the need to find solutions, the need to be able to inspire and to get people to be more committed. And it's always a delicate balance, because when we are talking about, for example, in the current situation, these difficulties that we are facing, we need to be very clear. But at the same time, we need to also give people a kind of a sense that it can be done. And this is what the scientists are saying. We can still, if we really do a real acceleration of our actions, we can still get to the 1.5 degree goal by the end of the century. So it is important that we keep that in mind, and we have that kind of inspiration and motivation. And at the same time, we put as much pressure as possible.
A couple of the questions that are coming in are relating to the business sector. There's, for example, the question whether the next COP, which will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh, is planning to set up a platform where industries from different sectors can exchange their knowledge about carbon reduction. So are you trying to get business more into the play?
Well, actually, this already happened in a much greater degree in Glasgow. Besides the negotiations where the governments are the ones that are involved, we have what we call the climate action space. And that climate action space includes all the private sector. So regarding the private sector, for example, we, together with the champions, which are representatives from the countries that are presiding over the conference, together with them, we launched some initiatives. One of them was the Race to Zero. So it was an initiative that allowed private sector entities, investors, businesses, companies, investors to join this Race to Zero initiative and to be acknowledged as entities that are really ready to make a difference. And I am expecting this to grow. Not only in terms of the Race to Zero, there are also initiatives in specific sectors. One of the sectors, for example, is transportation in general, and very specifically heavy transportation, the heavy transport, which is still very much dependent on fossil fuels. But there are many other areas like energy as well. So yes, this is a space that is expected to grow.
A very interesting question goes into the same direction. There's one listener who is asking whether you can't, if you if you can translate the COP26 plans into concrete recommendations for companies. And the argument that he's making is that the investment cycles of companies are sometimes very long. So is there a way to translate what governments are doing and promising, to translate this into plans for business, or is this something that should be left to the governments in the countries?
Well, no, actually, we are also in this engagement with the private sector. We are trying to encourage them also to make their plans for reducing emissions. And the formula in very general terms is simple, as a business, as any entity, you can assess your emissions. You can make a calculation. There are people and companies that are now very specialized in this. You assess your emissions, then you make a plan to reduce them. And whatever you do, you are unable to eliminate, because we have to assume that there may be a part that you cannot completely eliminate, then that you can compensate. With programs that will capture carbon in other parts of the world. So there is this methodology. We are providing guidance. Our role is not to do that work directly with companies, but we provide guidance, and what we are trying to do is also to facilitate the contact between the different entities that are engaged and that can be helpful and find the solutions.
One of the questions where your guidance could probably also be very helpful is the question whether the public sector should better work in future only with higher requests when it comes to public tenders. So should governments ask their business to go into CO neutral very quickly and otherwise exclude them from having business with public sector? You think this is a good idea?
Well, you know, I think that many of the governments have many instruments to guide this process of transformation. And one of them has to do with the regulations and the different rules that they establish internally for businesses and for society in general to function. And I think this is definitely one way that needs to be put in place. And of course, it involves, by the way, government and also the legislators. It involves also, for sure, a very good collaboration with the industry, with those business sectors. And in that exercise, which is political, economic, social, it really, because of the depth of the transformation, what needs to be the guiding idea is the fact that this is because we are all under threat. It is not, you know, to please somebody else. It is to save humanity and take the right decisions as leaders.
A similar conference in former times, when we got questions from our public, a lot of questions came from the activists. Today, you have a lot of questions from business. Is this just by chance, or do you also have the feeling that business is much more aware now of their role in this green transformation that we're all going through than compared to like 5 years ago?
Definitely. I think there is a much higher awareness. I think that a higher awareness comes from very different sources. On the one side, if you look at the disasters that we are experiencing literally every day in some part of the world, it implies that somewhere also business are being affected. So business are also directly being affected from those disastrous situations. On the other hand, there is, as much as the awareness in the public changes, the public is also changing their preferences on what they want, what they expect from business, what they want to see from business. I can see a change, for example, especially in young people when they decide what they will buy. They try to get products that are bio, that are fair trade, that are free of. So I think business is already seeing that the investing in very high emission products is not going to be sustainable in the coming future.
What about the commitment of Greta Thunberg? How do you assess that?
Well, she has been a very, very important voice in raising this awareness. And I think what we need to see is also as many voices from the youth as possible. And I am very, very grateful to the youth that has really raised their voices and have become one of the very strong forces in this movement.
Help us with a bit of an outlook towards Sharm el-Sheikh, the next climate conference in November. If it was a success, what has to happen? Is there one?
Well, it's very complicated to say if there's one thing, right? But if I would want to put it in a few words, it would be, we need to show progress from what we saw in Glasgow. So this means we need to see that there has been, that there is determination and that there has been an evolution in terms of the reduction of emissions in the different countries. We also need to see that there is an evolution regarding finance. For example, in Glasgow, the developed countries were expected to deliver a commitment made more than 10 years ago, and to deliver 100 billion, mobilize 100 billion to support the efforts of developing countries. It didn't happen in Glasgow, so this is something that we definitely need to see happening in the coming conference. On the other hand, in Glasgow, there was a recognition that much more support for developing countries needs to happen. So beyond the 100 billion, we need to see also movement on that. We need to see progress on adaptation. There is a very important initiative that we need to start, which is to assess what should be the global goal for adaptation. How can we make sure that everybody will be living in a resilient environment? And that is an area where we also need to see very strong and important progress. The island countries have also emphasized loss and damage, which means basically, you know, as a result of the impacts of climate change, the fact that they are losing territory, they are losing livelihoods, and you know, there should be some kind of international cooperation that addresses those particular needs. So we have a lot of areas where we need to show this progress.
A lot of the questions that I'm now getting in, and you probably won't be able to answer all of them because our session is coming to an end, are about global justice and climate justice. Should we think more of this problem as also a problem of global justice, where the West is obviously consuming most of the resources, is producing most of the CO2 emissions, and the South is suffering most?
Well, it is a question of global justice as well, and this is why the architecture for climate change has these different areas: the emissions reduction, the adaptation work, and then the support work. And the support for developing countries comes precisely from this concept. There is a need, those who have benefited from the infinite or unrestricted use of resources and have been able to build up some level of well-being, should be helping those who are now suffering the most the effects of climate change. This is one of the basic principles of the convention. What we hear as common but differentiated responsibilities. So it is about justice. It is about getting everybody to have the same possibility to address the effects of climate change.
The water glass that I'm having here is almost empty. So what about yours? And what about if we think about the stage of the world, the situation of the world? Is our glass half empty, half full? When you look towards...
Petra, you're absolutely right. We are living in probably one of the most complex and complicated moments in the history of humankind. I believe we are in a moment of a real moment of change for humanity, and we still have a chance. I still see my glass half full, not half empty. And, you know, I hope everybody will, you can get some more water and everybody else will see their glasses half full, so that we all get on with our contribution, even you know, in our everyday life to this deep transformation that we need.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having you, and good luck with the next conference.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing this very important issue and giving me this opportunity.